Questions and comments, please? Paul?
Short comment because I'm getting it a chance later. I think it's very impressive to see kinds of changes that can be made to, in local areas, particularly protect species that are endangered. One of the things that always impresses me is the efforts that go into figuring out how many species there are and how many are going extinct, because a lot of that is traces to people, largely in technical terms, idiots, who say that we can't tell there's an extinction crisis because we don't even know how many species there are, which is just equivalent to saying we can't tell if the beach is eroding until we have named and numbered and counted all the grains of sand on it. Thank you.
Well, as you and I both know, Paul, that one of the honors that I cherish the most is that Julian Simon attacked me before he died. And those are his arguments, and I feel very proud that I was singled out since you had had some interesting encounters with the man. Yes, the way in which we chose to frame that problem was precisely to get past this unfortunate business of having to name the species.
Other comments? Other comments? Yes.
Peter behind you.
Okay. Okay, who's behind can go?
Martin.
Martin, yes.
I just want to ask about a possible small, slight compensating effect, which is that presumably if the environment is changing more rapidly, then natural selection pressure is going to change species faster, and that must be a very slight effect that's going in the other direction.
I have to admit that I'm a Star Trek fan. And so one of my favorite characters is the engineer Scotty. And if you're a Star Trek fan, you know that his famous reply to his captain is, "She cannot go faster than that, Captain." And we have looked at exactly that problem. You know, how fast can nature go if everything is lined up and species are speciating just as fast as they can? And the answer is, you know, instead of a doubling time of 10 million years, that you can probably double in about 5 million years. And so that's not quite the answer to your question, but it's the nearest thing we can get with the data that we have. And you know what? It's still not a very big rate of recovery.
Margaret Archer?
So just a request for clarification. When you use the term recovery, do you mean by it reattaining the prior level of variety or diversity, or do you mean the actual re-establishment of the same species?
No, I mean, once you've lost a species, it's gone. I'm talking about recovering the former level of biodiversity. So if you wipe out, you know, 25% of all the birds, how long will it take you to get another, 2,500 species of bird back? And the argument for that is, you know, measured in many, many millions of years. It's the level of biodiversity, not the actual species which are gone.
Marcello?
No, I want to admire the things that you do in the Amazonia. I think the Amazonia today is a real model of the sustainable development. We have a meeting about water, and really the things that they do to conserve the water is very interesting. It's very important also to be in agreement with, say, this I don't remember your name, sorry, to present also the new perspectives that are in the good sense, and to especially for the new generations, And I think the Amazonia is really something that is very important, and I'm very happy that you present this model of corridor. I don't know.
Well, I think it's important because it's also fundamentally an issue of human rights. And I've made that plea because I think all too often discussions of biodiversity omit or ignore the connection to human rights. It's true of the issues where we work in Africa, where people are living adjacent to national parks and are not getting the benefit from the biodiversity of those national parks. Any conservation has to address the needs of the people who are living there and are living nearby.
Brian Heap.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Very interesting presentation. I'd like to push you a little.
Microphone.
I'd like to push you a little further on the question of rainforest preservation and the threat to rainforest from logging, commercial logging activities in particular, and the devastating effect that that's having in certain areas. Now, as you know, the Royal Society for some years has had a deep interest in Danam Valley in Malaysia, in Borneo. And you see the huge conflict there in terms of the devastation that's occurring in some of these rainforests. So, and the disappearance of some very important tree species. So can you say a little more about how you see this area developing? Is this a fait accompli and it's irreversible? Or is there something that can be developed that's going to be useful in this area?
First, let me say I know the Danam Valley and I know the Royal Society's work there. I spent time talking with the people there. There it is also a matter of the fact that there are people living in those forests. There are indigenous communities living in those forests. And when oil palm comes in, it displaces people and often does it in an extremely brutal and unacceptable way. If we look at tropical deforestation worldwide, there is good news and there is bad news. The good news is Brazil, for a long time, has reduced its deforestation by about 75%, which is an impressive achievement. It did that through a bilateral agreement between Brazil and Norway. Norway has not been as successful at limiting rainforest destruction in Southeast Asia. I think that's a much more difficult issue. The current threat is oil palm. Oil palm is a very productive crop. It's a very valuable crop. You can grow it on a small scale. A local farmer can have a hectare of oil palm and manage it himself, or you have vast oil palm plantations. Large fractions of the western Amazon are beginning to be cleared for oil palm. We have to be very, very vigilant in terms of looking at what can be done. Of course, the project in the Danam Valley is to look at forest isolation surrounded by oil palm as opposed to cattle pasture, which was what was done in the Amazon. It's a frightening prospect for the world's biodiversity and much of the world's linguistic diversity of the people living in those forests.
John Hole.
Stuart, an amazing presentation, and I like very much your planning model that you're using in the reconnection. The idea of the land mosaic system of connecting nodes and the corridors, and I'm interested in the layering of that with some of the social constructs that you have to engage with. Because clearly from a biodiversity perspective and a species thing, you would have ideal widths of corridors and sizes of nodes. How does that layer into some of the key challenges of land tenure and the use value to the local communities? And how do you balance trying to make those two systems work, particularly in more indigenous population areas?
Well, in terms of indigenous populations, if you look at the Amazon and you look at where in the Amazon there is forest remaining, it maps out almost exactly on where indigenous reserves are. Generally indigenous, not always, but generally indigenous people want to look after their forest. In terms of what we do, I'm sometimes challenged by people who say, how dare you go in and convert a cattle pasture into a nature reserve. I mean, don't people want to eat? What is truly appalling is something like 5 million square kilometers of the 7 million square kilometers of destroyed tropical rainforest, tropical moist forest, is basically worthless land. It's gone from being forest to being a weed patch. This land in coastal Brazil, for example, was cleared for coffee. Coffee exhausted the soil. People now try and grow cattle on it. It's a miserably bad land for cattle. I don't think we've quite understood how much damage we've caused that is sheer folly. It's not the 2 million square kilometers of tropical moist forest that's productive agricultural land. It's mostly bad. It's mostly infested by the same weeds that occur worldwide: lantana, eucalyptus, ricin, castor bean. There's an awful lot of bad land. And yes, I mean, we raise some of our money at Saving Species from carbon offsets, and for $10 a ton of carbon, we can save an awful lot of the world's forest without having any significant impact on the local community, because the land is just not very useful for anything else.
I might say that in Madagascar, the Missouri Botanical Garden has selected 13 villages where there are fragments of forest by them, and encourage them, employ them in part in regenerating and repopulating the forest and filling it out. It's one of the places where people use the forest more than any other. And we've also enlisted the Washington University Business School, which regularly sends teams out there and consults with each one of these groups to try to look for ways that they can improve their livelihood, because they're extremely poor. And if you combine all those things together, you have a pretty good operation. Something like what Stuart talked about. It is one of the poorest countries on earth and one of the richest in terms of its biodiversity, and one of the most thoroughly destroyed. So we feel happy about that. It's not enough, but it's concrete.
I think the interesting thing that you mentioned there was the use value.
Microphone. Yeah.
The
that's
use
right.
value of
That's right.
the reconnected forest lands or habitats becoming really instrumental in the ability to achieve this restoration.
Right.
I mean, we have some active projects in Colombia and Ecuador, and these are cloud forests, these are montane forests. You cut the forest down on a steep mountain slope, and it rains, and you get massive soil erosion, massive landslides, often massive loss of life. What strikes me is so much of what we are doing is undoing folly, of giving local communities an alternative that's better for them and better for biodiversity. And often they completely understand the fact that, chopping down a forest on a steep hillside hasn't given them any benefit whatsoever.
Steve Pulaski.
Thanks. Actually, I wanted to kind of build on this and thinking about some of the policy responses or some of the things that we can do to stop some of the loss. But I wonder if you could comment on, sometimes it seems to me that the speed of processes which lead to destruction, like a new product is discovered or prices go up, and how fast can we respond? Can we have the speed of protection keep up with the speed of destruction?
We are very much involved in remote sensing on a very, very short time period. Colleagues now looking at the Western Amazon are looking at remote sensing on a weekly basis. And yes, you can have a big impact that way. I mean, there are areas of oil palm deforestation in Peru that ought not to be there. We can often identify them within a week or 2 weeks of them being cleared, and we can get the local authorities to go in and do what they're supposed to do. Is that perfect? No. But our response time now is very, very much faster. A few years ago, when Madagascar had a coup, it led to a substantial increase in rosewood poaching. We knew it was having a big impact on the forest. We knew individual trees were being taken out. People were arguing that it was just an individual tree, and I said we need better spying. So I went and talked to my spy master, Peter Raven, and I said, Peter, I need $8,000 for a satellite image to task a dock in Madagascar, and Peter very kindly paid up. And we tasked a satellite, and we showed lots and lots of rosewood piled high on docks waiting to be shipped. And that message got out very quickly, and I think had a beneficial response. I think the environmental community now is in a position to act very, very fast and very quickly to address some of these things, providing we're looking in the right places.
Deforestation in the tropics is incredibly fast, but what we're really doing is trying to build a sustainable world out of the pieces that are left and the things we can achieve. And, you know, lots of people in this room are very involved in that. There's no doubt if you look at deforestation in Indonesia, in Brazil, in Africa, it's proceeded very rapidly during the whole 21st century. But by finding the pieces, by connecting the parts, by finding ways to enrich people, and by caring enough, we can do something as we try to adjust to a sustainable world.